the ice core defied every principle of glacial formation. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had extracted thousands of samples from Antarctic glaciers during her 15-year career, understanding the rules governing how ancient ice preserved atmospheric history. Clear layers marking prehistoric seasons, trapped air bubbles holding samples of atmospheres from when woolly rhinoceri roamed Siberian steppes, volcanic ash from eruptions occurring while early humans learned to control fire. Discovery of metallic fragments embedded in ice that geological dating placed at 2 million years old, yet spectrographic analysis dated to 12,000 years ago, buried beneath layers requiring millennia to accumulate above them, violated every law of stratigraphy. Standing in McMurdo Station's sterile research facility, fluorescent lights humming against polar darkness, Mitchell held evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions about time, depth, and preservation in Antarctic geological systems. 3 days earlier, ground-penetrating radar had detected geometric patterns beneath 2 miles of solid ice. Patterns too regular for natural formation, too extensive for geological accident, too precisely aligned to represent anything other than architectural intention spanning extensive subsurface development. Mitchell approached the radar display, where false color images revealed urban planning principles suggesting populations, engineering capabilities, and social organization during periods when Antarctica was supposed to have been uninhabited and uninhabitable. Everything contradicted established understanding. Depth placement violated ice accumulation rates. Preservation challenged knowledge of material survival in frozen environments. Architectural sophistication exceeded capabilities anthropology attributed to societies during these supposed construction periods. Yet evidence remained undeniable through multiple independent measurement systems. Someone had built cities in Antarctica during climatic periods supporting human habitation. Someone whose architectural achievements were preserved through 25 millennia of environmental change. Someone whose technological capabilities enabled structures surviving longer than any documented civilization. The preservation implied intention. Someone had created metallic objects. Someone had built architectural structures. Someone had inhabited Antarctica during climatic windows, enabling complex society in landscapes now buried beneath miles of ice. Discovery challenged more than archaeological timelines. It suggested human potential extending beyond contemporary achievements. Technological capability achieved, lost, and preserved informs modern civilization was rediscovering through instruments sophisticated enough to detect what ancient ages had left beneath ice and institutional silence. Recovery rather than innovation, memory rather than discovery, inheritance rather than achievement. Modern human civilization might represent not first attempt at organized society, but latest effort to rebuild from fragments preserved by minds understanding something about survival, knowledge, and time we were still learning to remember. Perhaps the most disturbing realization was that evidence suggested intentional preservation rather than accidental survival. The placement, engineering, technological sophistication, all implied that ancient Antarctic civilization had prepared for environmental catastrophe by creating archives preserving their achievements across transitions that would otherwise cause complete cultural amnesia. Geometric patterns emerged from radar analysis with mathematical clarity. Dr. Marcus Thompson had distinguished natural formations from human construction across 6 continents through subsurface investigations that revealed organizational principles underlying buried archaeological features. Antarctic readings demonstrated architectural precision appearing only when intelligent minds imposed systematic order on construction materials. Linear features extending kilometers beneath frozen surfaces. Perfect 90-degree intersections connecting massive rectangular formations. circular arrangements suggesting ceremonial centers organized according to urban planning principles requiring sophisticated design knowledge. Depth measurements positioned structures beneath ice layers that stratigraphic analysis dated to 25 millennia of accumulation. Predating agriculture, permanent settlements, technological capabilities supposedly necessary for urban construction anywhere on Earth. Thompson examined the endless white landscape extending beyond every visible horizon. Wind-transported ice crystals that had been accumulating since before writing systems emerged. The frozen terrain beneath his insulated boots had remained solid since the earliest settlements appeared in river valleys of Mesopotamia. Yet radar penetration revealed construction projects that dwarfed achievements of civilizations supposedly learning urban planning from Sumerian examples. Individual structures measured hundreds of meters across. The complex extended over extensive subsurface development, representing metropolitan planning preserved like three-dimensional blueprints of architectural ambition that preceded documented human capabilities by geological ages. Environmental preservation conditions were optimal for archaeological maintenance. Antarctic ice never experienced melt-refreeze cycles that destroyed organic materials in temperate glaciers. Instead, accumulation and compression created stratified layers that functioned as perfect archival storage, maintaining buried contents in crystalline suspension that prevented degradation across time spans exceeding any institutional preservation capabilities. Radar signatures revealed active systems designed for functionality despite burial beneath accumulating ice. Temperature regulation, preventing structural damage from freeze-thaw cycling. Drainage, managing condensation without surface access for water removal. Ventilation, circulating air through sealed environments using techniques that modern underground construction found difficult to implement successfully. Thompson initiated systematic mapping protocols that would document every architectural element the instruments could detect. Each scan revealed additional complexity that deepened rather than resolve fundamental questions about who had possessed the technological capabilities necessary for Antarctic construction and why they had chosen the world's most challenging environment for their largest architectural projects. Engineering implications were staggering. Antarctic construction required solving problems that contemporary technology approached with reluctance, even using computer-controlled equipment, advanced materials, and extensive logistical support systems. Ancient builders had apparently solved identical challenges using techniques that left no archaeological evidence of their development or implementation. The underground metropolis demonstrated no structural failure or environmental damage. After 25 millennia beneath accumulating ice sheets, geometric patterns remained crisp and clearly defined, indicating construction techniques that achieved durability standards modern architecture struggled to match using advanced materials and engineering methods. Climate correlation data supported revolutionary conclusions. Antarctica had experienced warming periods that temporarily made coastal regions habitable during climate windows that paleoclimatology insisted were too brief and too cold for human settlement. The timing of these warm periods corresponded exactly to the estimated age of the buried architecture. Underground city builders understood Antarctic climate cycles with precision that enabled them to plan construction projects during environmental windows that provided optimal building conditions before cooling temperatures triggered ice sheet formation that would preserve their achievements through subsequent glacial periods.
Thompson examined the architectural orientations, noting alignments that weren't arbitrary, but calculated according to astronomical considerations requiring sophisticated knowledge of celestial mechanics. The builders had positioned their structures to optimize solar exposure during Antarctic summer periods while maintaining protection from winter conditions that modern research stations barely survived using advanced heating systems and insulated construction techniques. Evidence suggested that what lay beneath Antarctic ice represented not ancient human achievement, but ancient human inheritance. Construction projects that preserved knowledge systems developed by civilizations sophisticated enough to anticipate environmental catastrophe and prepare for technological continuity through transitions that would otherwise cause complete cultural collapse. The architects had understood something modern civilization was still learning: that building for permanence required comprehending cycles operating across geological time. That preservation demanded more than construction. It required preparation for futures that could survive catastrophes that would destroy everything built without such extraordinary foresight.
Admiral Piri Reis had mapped the impossible. Dr. Elena Vasquez understood this with certainty, examining the Ottoman admiral's 1513 world map under Stanford University's sophisticated manuscript analysis equipment. Medieval cartography depended on visual verification, explorers mapping territories they could walk, sailors charting coastlines they could observe, navigators documenting routes they could verify through multiple expeditions. The Antarctic coastline depicted on Piri Reis's gazelle skin parchment parcher demonstrated surveying precision matching 20th century satellite cartography, mathematical impossibility using 16th century navigation, yet geographical accuracy verified through modern instruments, confirming every bay, peninsula, mountain range the Ottoman admiral had somehow documented 3 centuries before Antarctica's official discovery. Vasquez calibrated digital microscopy examining individual pen strokes, revealing cartographer confidence in geographical sources. Decisive accuracy rather than uncertain approximation. Each coastal feature drawn with precision, indicating verified survey data rather than estimated distances and compass bearings dependent on medieval navigation limitations. The admiral's marginal notes referenced ancient sources dating to Alexander's era, geographical documents preserved in libraries destroyed centuries before Ottoman cartography. Maps drawn by earlier civilizations whose navigational capabilities exceeded classical antiquity's supposed technological limitations. But Alexander's empire terminated at Egypt's borders. No Macedonian expedition ventured beyond Mediterranean regions. Classical navigation technology was limited to coastal sailing and river transportation, lacking ships or instruments capable of polar exploration. Vasquez examined comparative examples, revealing systematic patterns of impossible geographical knowledge preserved in medieval European cartographic collections. The Orontes Phineas map of 1531 portrayed ice-free Antarctica with rivers, mountains, coastal features that submarine mapping confirmed existed beneath current ice sheets. The Bush map of 1754 showed Antarctica divided into land masses connected by narrow isthmuses. Configuration sonar analysis proved accurate when applied to bedrock topography hidden beneath glacial coverage. Each anachronistic map contained geographical information creators couldn't acquire through contemporary exploration, yet verified through modern instruments revealing medieval cartographic accuracy about territories remaining officially undiscovered for centuries after maps were drawn. Institutional documentation was equally perplexing.
These weren't speculative sketches by individual cartographers. They were formal maps commissioned by royal courts, ecclesiastical institutions, commercial navigation companies requiring verified geographical information for political and economic purposes. Medieval power structures invested significant resources in cartographic accuracy because territorial claims, trade routes, military campaigns depended on reliable geographical knowledge. Courts commissioning maps showing impossible accuracy were making institutional commitments to information they believed legitimate and verifiable.
Vázquez conducted systematic comparison analyses between medieval Antarctic cartography and modern satellite surveys. Correspondence exceeded statistical significance in every measured parameter: coastal outline accuracy, proportional relationships, internal geographical feature placement. Mathematical precision suggesting medieval mapmakers copied from source materials created through direct geographical survey rather than speculative reconstruction. Direct Antarctic survey required navigational technology functioning in polar conditions. Ships surviving ice encounters, surveying instruments, maintaining accuracy despite environmental challenges destroying most equipment. Modern Antarctic exploration achieved such capabilities using steel-hulled icebreakers, satellite navigation, and survival equipment developed through decades of technological refinement. Ancient navigators had achieved comparable results using wooden ships, magnetic compasses, and navigation techniques modern sailors considered primitive for temperate ocean travel. The technology gap seemed insurmountable unless ancient navigation possessed capabilities official history consistently underestimated. Preservation mechanisms required institutional support for copying, maintenance, and transmission across generations of political change and cultural transformation. Cartographic knowledge survived only when institutions considered it valuable enough to justify preservation expenses. Yet Antarctic geographical information had been preserved through multiple copying cycles despite having no obvious practical value for medieval European powers. Maps documented territories unreachable using contemporary transportation, serving no apparent commercial, military, or political purposes for institutions funding cartographic preservation projects. Unless institutions understood future importance of Antarctic geographical knowledge, that wouldn't become apparent until modern technology made polar exploration feasible. Unless they preserved information whose value transcended immediate practical applications, because someone had convinced them such knowledge would prove essential for purposes they couldn't yet comprehend. The transmission networks connecting medieval European cartographers to ancient geographical sources remained historically invisible, despite documentary evidence that such networks existed and functioned across centuries of cultural change. Manuscript traditions preserved classical texts. Monastic libraries maintained archives through political upheavals. Commercial routes transported documents alongside trade goods between distant geographical regions. But geographical transmission required more than document copying. It required institutional memory, maintaining understanding of why certain information deserved preservation even when its practical application remained unclear. Someone had to convince medieval institutions that ancient Antarctic maps contained knowledge worth preserving across generations of copyists who couldn't verify geographical accuracy through their own exploration experience. Standing among impossible maps demonstrating geographical knowledge their creators couldn't explain, Vázquez confronted evidence that human navigation history contained capabilities exceeding official technological timelines.
Medieval cartographers had either achieved impossible accuracy through undocumented methods or inherited geographical knowledge from sources sophisticated enough to conduct Antarctic exploration using navigation technology modern maritime archaeology had never discovered. The maps were more than geographical documents. They were inheritance records, preserving navigational wisdom across centuries of institutional transmission until technology became sophisticated enough to verify what ancient explorers had somehow observed, measured, and documented with precision that anticipated scientific discoveries by hundreds of years.
Oxygen isotopes rarely lie about climate history. Dr. James Crawford understood this fundamental principle after 23 years analyzing paleoclimatic data at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Each microscopic air bubble trapped in Antarctic ice preserved atmospheric conditions from the moment water froze, creating molecular archives that recorded Earth's climate across hundreds of thousands of years with chemical precision that couldn't be manipulated or misinterpreted. Examining ice core samples from East Antarctica, Crawford confronted isotopic evidence that contradicted established models of polar climate stability. The data indicated rapid temperature fluctuations between 45,000 and 20,000 years ago that transformed Antarctica from permanently frozen continent to partially habitable landmass and back to Ice Age conditions within time spans measured in centuries rather than millennia. Temperature reconstructions showed warming periods intense enough to melt significant portions of coastal ice sheets, creating environments that could support vegetation, wildlife, and potentially complex human societies during climate windows that orthodox paleoclimatology maintained were impossible given Antarctica's geographical position and atmospheric circulation patterns. Crawford manipulated his spectrometer controls and focused on ice core sections that recorded the most dramatic climate anomalies. The molecular evidence was undeniable. Between 40,000 and 25,000 years ago, Antarctic temperatures had risen dramatically above current levels, sustaining warm conditions for periods lasting several thousand years before equally dramatic cooling events restored Ice Age conditions. But these weren't gradual climate transitions that unfolded across geological timescales. The isotopic signatures indicated environmental changes rapid enough to affect individual human lifespans, transforming habitable regions into frozen wasteland within generations. Climate shifts so abrupt that suggested catastrophic environmental forcing rather than natural climate variation. The biological evidence deepened the temporal contradictions beyond simple temperature anomalies. Pollen analysis revealed flowering plants, grain species, and fruit trees that required organized agricultural cultivation. Not wild vegetation adapting to brief warming periods, but evidence of systematic farming practiced in Antarctic regions that were now buried beneath miles of ice. Agricultural pollen in Antarctic ice cores violated basic assumptions about continental isolation and climate history. Even during maximum interglacial warming, Antarctica was supposed to have remained too cold and too isolated to support farming communities. Yet microscopic analysis revealed evidence of crop cultivation that required not just favorable climate, but human populations large enough to justify agricultural development and sophisticated enough to maintain farming systems across climate variations that would challenge modern agricultural technology.
Crawford accessed the mass spectrometer interface and programmed analysis protocols for detecting trace chemical signatures that would indicate human industrial activity during Antarctic warm periods. The results exceeded his most optimistic expectations. Atmospheric chemistry showed markers consistent with metallurgy, pottery production, and fuel combustion at levels that suggested large-scale manufacturing rather than small-scale craft production.
But industrial activity required technological infrastructure, energy systems, and resource extraction capabilities that official anthropology insisted didn't develop until much later periods of human history. The chemical evidence implied that Antarctic populations had achieved manufacturing sophistication during periods when human technology elsewhere consisted of stone tools and animal hide shelters. The isotopic chronology was what convinced Crawford that Antarctic climate anomalies weren't natural variations, but evidence of anthropogenic climate modification. The warming patterns showed characteristics that modern climate science recognized as artificial enhancement rather than natural temperature fluctuation. Someone had been managing Antarctic climate using techniques that maintained habitable conditions despite geographical factors that should have prevented sustained warming. Regional climate control required understanding of atmospheric physics, oceanographic systems, and energy distribution that current environmental engineering was only beginning to comprehend through computer modeling and satellite monitoring. Yet the ice core evidence indicated such capabilities had been implemented in Antarctica during periods when human technology was supposed to lack even basic metallurgy. Crawford walked to the climate modeling workstation, where computer algorithms processed isotopic data into visual representations of ancient environmental conditions. The reconstructions showed Antarctica transformed into landscapes that resembled Mediterranean or temperate regions during warming periods, with river systems, coastal plains, and mountain valleys that could have supported populations numbering in hundreds of thousands. The habitable area calculations were staggering. Ice-free Antarctica would have provided nearly 14 million square kilometers of potentially arable land, equivalent to the combined area of the continental United States and Mexico. The agricultural potential during warm periods exceeded what most ancient civilizations had available for supporting large populations and complex social organization. But managing climate on continental scales required energy systems and technological coordination that exceeded current capabilities for environmental modification. The ice core evidence suggested that Antarctic climate management had maintained stable conditions for thousands of years before catastrophic cooling restored ice age conditions with speed that would have made evacuation and preservation the only options for civilizational survival. The chemical signatures revealed additional evidence of technological sophistication that deepened rather than resolved questions about Antarctic industrial capabilities. Trace metal analysis indicated smelting activities that produced alloys requiring furnace temperatures achievable only through advanced metallurgical techniques. Atmospheric chemistry showed combustion patterns consistent with fuel systems more sophisticated than wood or coal burning. Energy signatures suggested power generation on scales that required understanding of physics and engineering that wouldn't be formally developed until industrial periods of much later civilizations. But energy infrastructure massive enough to affect continental climate required more than technical knowledge. It required social organization, capable of coordinating complex technological systems across geographical areas that exceeded the administrative capabilities of most known ancient societies. The ice cores weren't just recording ancient climate history. They were preserving warnings about environmental fragility written in molecular language by minds that understood something about the relationship between human ambition
and planetary stability we might need to remember before we repeated their mistakes on a global scale.
Mathematical precision carved in limestone defied Bronze Age capabilities. Dr. Amira Hassan had calculated construction tolerances across 17 major archaeological sites during her career as a structural engineer, distinguishing between ancient approximation and modern accuracy through detailed measurement analysis that revealed the technical limitations of different historical periods. Standing before the Great Pyramid at dawn, watching morning light illuminate joint seams thinner than business cards between stone blocks weighing 15 tons each, Hassan confronted engineering mathematics that challenged fundamental assumptions about ancient construction technology. Error margins measured less than 2 millimeters across joints extending hundreds of meters around the monument's base. Not rough stone fitting typical of Bronze Age masonry, but machining precision that required tools and techniques supposedly unavailable until industrial manufacturing developed mechanical cutting equipment. Yet these massive limestone blocks had been shaped, transported, and positioned with accuracy that contemporary contractors achieved using computer-controlled machinery. Hassan examined her laser measurement results and recorded dimensional data that challenged fundamental assumptions about ancient construction tolerances. The engineering precision exceeded modern standards while using techniques that left no archaeological evidence of their development. Base measurements accurate to centimeters across 13 acres of foundation. Angular calculations precise to fractions of degrees. Structural alignment pointing to true north with accuracy that required sophisticated surveying instruments and mathematical knowledge of Earth's rotational mechanics. Ancient Egyptian builders supposedly had constructed these monuments using copper tools, wooden levers, and rope systems operated through human labor coordination. Historical timelines placed construction around 2500 BCE when metallurgy was limited to basic smelting and mathematics consisted of practical arithmetic for agricultural and commercial calculation. Yet engineering analysis revealed capabilities that exceeded those technological limitations by orders of magnitude. Internal chamber systems demonstrated structural engineering that anticipated stress patterns most civilizations never learned to calculate. Ventilation networks aligned to stellar positions with astronomical precision that required understanding of celestial mechanics. Foundation design distributed weight loads using principles that prevented geological settling across architectural timescales. Hassan circumnavigated the monument's perimeter, documenting construction details that became increasingly problematic the more systematically she analyzed them. Stone blocks weren't merely precisely cut, but individually shaped to fit specific positions in the overall structural system, suggesting the entire pyramid had been designed as unified architecture rather than assembled from standardized components through experimental construction methods. The logistics defied conventional explanation. Moving 15-ton limestone blocks required engineering solutions for quarrying, transportation, and positioning that modern construction achieved using hydraulic cranes, computer-controlled machinery, and steel cable systems. Ancient builders had apparently accomplished identical results using techniques that left no archaeological evidence of their implementation. Precision cutting presented equally mysterious technological requirements. Creating millimeter-accurate joints required cutting tools harder than limestone, measuring instruments capable of verifying dimensional specifications, and quality control systems that ensured consistency across thousands of individual stone components. Where were the tool marks? Where were the measuring devices? Where were the experimental structures where builders tested new approaches before implementing them in final construction? Archaeological absence troubled Hassan more than technological presence. Construction projects leave behind debris of techniques used to complete them. Broken tools, discarded materials, practice structures where builders experimented with methods before applying them to permanent architecture. Pyramid complexes showed no such developmental archaeology. The earliest construction phases were already perfect, suggesting builders who were implementing established procedures rather than inventing new techniques. Hassan reviewed her engineering analysis data, comparing pyramid engineering to megalithic sites worldwide. Sacsayhuaman in Peru demonstrated identical precision cutting in stones weighing over 100 tons. Pumapunku in Bolivia displayed interlocking blocks shaped according to geometric principles that required advanced mathematical understanding. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey revealed astronomical alignments calculated thousands of years before the stellar positions would become visible. Technological consistency across isolated cultures indicated systematic knowledge transmission rather than independent innovation. Identical cutting techniques appeared on different continents. Similar astronomical understanding guided temple orientations in civilizations that had never documented contact. Equivalent mathematical principles governed architectural proportions in societies separated by oceans and millennia. Either multiple ancient cultures had independently developed identical advanced capabilities through parallel innovation, or they had inherited construction knowledge from common sources that possessed engineering techniques superior to what individual civilizations achieved through autonomous technological development. Engineering specifications supported the inheritance interpretation. Megalithic construction required solutions to problems that most cultures never attempted because of technical complexity and resource requirements. Modern contractors approached such challenges using computer modeling, precision machinery, and material science developed through centuries of technological advancement. Ancient builders had apparently solved identical problems using methods that remained archaeologically invisible. The preservation patterns indicated institutional knowledge transmission rather than individual technical innovation. Megalithic sites maintained construction standards that remained consistent across centuries of cultural development, suggesting builders were following established protocols rather than experimenting with new approaches. The uniformity revealed systematic training programs and quality control standards that required organizational capabilities allegedly unknown to ancient societies. Hassan returned to her analysis of pyramid internal architecture, noting engineering solutions that anticipated problems modern buildings continued struggling to address. Foundation systems accounted for geological settling that wouldn't become apparent for centuries. Chamber placement distributed structural loads using physics that weren't formally understood until scientific revolution. Ventilation management controlled air circulation without surface access using principles that contemporary underground construction found difficult to implement. The builders had solved engineering problems before those problems became apparent, designed for permanence across timescales that exceeded the lifespan of commissioning civilizations, implemented solutions for challenges that wouldn't become obvious until geological ages after construction completion. This represented architectural prophecy, building for futures that couldn't be predicted without understanding cycles that spanned millennia. Perhaps megalithic builders weren't achieving unprecedented capabilities, but recovering technological understanding that had been developed in environments where perfect preservation could maintain evidence until human consciousness became sophisticated enough to recognize inheritance disguised as innovation. Memory preserved in mathematical relationships that connected contemporary engineering to wisdom traditions whose Antarctic origins had been buried beneath ice and institutional forgetting.
Blood samples told stories DNA analysis couldn't categorize. Dr. Catherine Liu had processed genetic material from thousands of individuals across every continent during her decade at Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology.
understanding boundaries defining human genetic diversity, mutation accumulation across millennia, population bottlenecks shaping modern genetics, migratory patterns traceable through maternal lineages extending to humanity's African origins. Genetic material from indigenous Chilean and Argentinian populations contained markers that defied classification within known human genetic categories. Mitochondrial DNA sequences showing extreme antiquity characteristics combined with nuclear DNA suggesting admixture with populations absent from genetic records. These coastal South American groups claimed ancestral migration from icelands during periods their oral traditions insisted the southern continent was green and habitable. Genetic evidence supported their claims through characteristics challenging fundamental assumptions about human migration patterns and population history. Maternal lineages revealed isolation characteristics lasting longer than any documented population bottleneck. Nuclear DNA contained markers suggesting genetic founding events involving extremely small populations with unusually high diversity, as if original groups had been selected to preserve maximum biological variation through demographic transitions normally causing genetic drift. Most disturbing was presence of genetic sequences absent from contemporary human populations, yet showing relationships to ancient DNA extracted from archaeological sites across multiple continents. Anomalous populations carried genetic markers connecting them to Paleolithic Europeans, ancient Siberians, Austronesian seafarers, as if ancestors had maintained genetic contact with distant populations during periods when such contact was impossible. Liu accessed climate-controlled storage containing DNA samples from worldwide populations. Each vial held molecular evidence of human history written in genetic inheritance chemical language, sequences telling migration stories, adaptation narratives, survival accounts readable through instruments sophisticated enough to decode cellular information. Population genetics traced human movement across geographical space and evolutionary time through molecular archaeology, comparing genetic sequences from different populations, reconstructing family trees extending thousands of generations, revealing separation, migration, occasional reunion patterns across humanity's journey from African origins to global distribution. Anomalous sequences suggested different narratives entirely. Rather than gradual population expansion driven by environmental pressures and resource opportunities, genetic evidence indicated rapid dispersal involving small groups with sophisticated navigation knowledge, seasonal pattern understanding, long-distance survival techniques. Genetic founder effects were too organized for accident, too systematic for random environmental forcing. Comparative analysis of ancient DNA from Siberian, Australian, Western European archaeological sites revealed undeniable genetic relationships. Anomalous South American populations shared specific marker sequences with Paleolithic groups separated by thousands of miles and years, suggesting contact networks spanning continents during periods when such contact weren't supposed to exist. Timing perfectly aligned with climate data, showing Antarctica experiencing periodic warming phases supporting human habitation. Genetic founding events corresponded to Antarctic habitable period terminations, as if populations were evacuated from southern continent before environmental conditions became unsurvivable. Genetic evacuation required advanced climate change knowledge, organizational capabilities coordinating population movements across vast distances, navigational techniques reaching specific destinations on different continents. Evidence suggested Antarctic inhabitants during ice-free periods possessed technologies enabling survival of catastrophic environmental change through dispersal to carefully selected locations worldwide. Genetic diversity preservation convinced Liu that dispersal was planned rather than random. Small populations usually experience genetic bottlenecks, reducing diversity and increasing vulnerability.
Anomalous groups showed evidence of genetic management maintaining maximum diversity through devastating population reductions. They carried genetic material from multiple founding populations, ancestors apparently selected from different groups to preserve biological variation through demographic transitions, normally causing genetic homogenization. Systematic preservation of human genetic resources using techniques anticipating biological challenges of population dispersal and environmental adaptation. Genetic dating analyses revealed molecular clocks measuring time through mutation rates accumulated across thousands of generations. Anomalous sequences showed genetic ages both ancient and recent. Markers of extreme antiquity combined with evidence of recent admixture, suggesting ongoing contact between supposedly isolated populations. Genetic chronology contradicted expectations. These populations should show either ancient isolation or recent migration, not both simultaneously. Molecular evidence indicated maintained genetic contact across continents for thousands of years, while preserving genetic characteristics suggesting ancestors had been isolated much longer. Population network management across continental distances required systematic genetic diversity maintenance through planned reproductive strategies and navigational capabilities, enabling regular contact between groups separated by oceans and ice sheets. Such capabilities imply knowledge systems that official anthropology insisted didn't exist until modern times. Global navigation, genetic management, population coordination across continental distances, technological and organizational sophistication predating documented human capabilities by tens of thousands of years. Liu studied laboratory instruments reading molecular histories extending to humanity's earliest origins, confronting evidence that human genetic diversity preserved narratives different from archaeological textbook accounts. DNA evidence was mathematically demonstrable. Molecular clocks couldn't be manipulated. Genetic relationships were quantifiable. Human populations carried genetic memories of contact with groups possessing capabilities, knowledge, survival strategies that required no justification unless environmental catastrophes had repeatedly forced abandonment of homelands and civilizational rebuilding from scattered genetic fragments. Genetic ghost populations weren't statistical artifacts, but evidence of minds sophisticated enough to preserve human biological diversity through environmental catastrophes, reducing species to extinction. Those minds had once inhabited the only place on Earth where perfect preservation could maintain evidence of their existence for 25,000 years, awaiting technology sophisticated enough to read genetic messages written into the DNA of every living human being.
Manuscripts from 47 cultures described identical catastrophe. Dr. Michael Brennan had researched comparative flood mythologies for 15 years at Harvard Divinity School, examining translations that revealed mechanical consistency across isolated human societies. Not similar stories, but identical narrative structures describing divine warning, righteous survivor, specific construction instructions, global catastrophe, mountain landing, covenant renewal. Spread across his manuscript desk were oral traditions from Mapuche communities in southern Chile describing ancient world destruction through waters covering highest mountains. Survivors escaped in vessels guided by ancestors possessing navigation knowledge and celestial timing, enabling them to reach safety in distant lands. Geographical specificity transcended vague metaphor. These were detailed survival accounts, including technical specifications for waterproof construction,
provisions for extended voyages, navigation instructions demonstrating sophisticated understanding of ocean currents, seasonal weather patterns, and astronomical positioning. Hopi traditions described Third World destruction through comprehensive flooding, except highest peaks. But survivors weren't randomly scattered. According to oral accounts, they were guided to specific locations by beings understanding which areas would remain habitable versus which would become uninhabitable wilderness. Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime stories revealed narrative elements matching global patterns with disturbing precision. Rainbow serpent myths described dramatic sea level rise, flooding coastal territories and forcing inland migration. Stories included timing details, flooding duration, specific geographical features providing refuge during catastrophe. Consistency across isolated cultures was statistically impossible unless all remembered identical events. Mathematical analysis of narrative convergence indicated chance alone couldn't account for structural similarities between flood myths from cultures separated by oceans and continents for tens of thousands of years. Alternative explanation was equally troubling. If myths preserved cultural memory of actual catastrophic flooding, human civilization was older than official history acknowledged. Flood stories consistently described advanced pre-catastrophe societies with capabilities official anthropology insisted didn't develop until much later periods. Vedic traditions describe Dwarka destruction, advanced maritime civilization achieving architectural and technological sophistication before being swallowed by rising seas. Accounts included metallurgy descriptions, urban planning details, navigational techniques matching archaeological evidence from much later historical periods. Norse Ragnarok mythology preserved similar accounts of ancient world destruction through environmental catastrophe followed by renewal and rebuilding. Pre-catastrophe capability descriptions included technological achievements suggesting destroyed civilizations possessed knowledge systems later Scandinavian cultures spent centuries redeveloping.
Climate-controlled manuscript vaults contain texts from civilizations contributing fragments to identical fundamental narrative about catastrophic loss and partial recovery. Dating correlations were convincing evidence of systematic preservation in mythological accounts. Geological evidence of rapid sea level rise at last ice age's end corresponded exactly to timing suggested by cultural chronologies embedded in flood myths. Environmental catastrophe described in oral traditions had actually occurred, creating global disruption, destroying coastal civilizations, and forcing massive population migrations. Flood myths weren't just remembering environmental disaster, but preserving technical knowledge about survival strategies, navigation techniques, reconstruction procedures, enabling some populations to escape catastrophe and maintain advanced capability fragments in new territories. Survival instructions embedded in flood narratives included vessel construction specifications requiring naval architecture understanding, provisions management demonstrating long-distance voyage planning knowledge, settlement procedures suggesting systematic approaches to establishing communities in unfamiliar environments. These weren't desperate improvisation strategies developed during crisis situations, but prepared protocols indicating populations had anticipated catastrophic environmental change and developed comprehensive contingency plans enabling preservation of biological survival plus cultural and technological continuity through civilizational collapse. Geographical patterns supported interpretation.
Flood mythology was most detailed among populations living in regions optimal for evacuations from Antarctica during final ice-free periods. Coastal South America, Southern Africa, Australia preserved flood traditions, including Southern origins references and ancestral knowledge preserved through catastrophic transitions. Mythological framework wasn't accidental, but deliberate preservation strategy. By transforming technical knowledge into divine instruction, populations created cultural immune systems, protecting essential information from natural degradation, effecting purely secular knowledge transmission. Flood myths preserved memory not of isolated cultural disasters, but of recurring civilizational pattern. Advanced societies achieving remarkable capabilities, environmental catastrophe forcing abandonment of homelands, partial knowledge preservation through prepared evacuation protocols enabling rebuilding in safer geographical locations using inherited technological understanding. Navigation instructions, construction techniques, survival protocols, rebuilding procedures, comprehensive contingency planning requiring institutional knowledge spanning generations and technological capabilities exceeding individual cultural achievements through systematic preparation for environmental catastrophes. Modern civilization faced identical vulnerabilities. Dependence on complex systems most people didn't understand, knowledge concentration in institutions vulnerable to disruption, reliance on technologies requiring specialized expertise for maintenance. Flood mythology preserved warnings about civilizational fragility written in narrative language by minds understanding something about environmental cycles, technological vulnerability, and knowledge preservation that contemporary institutions were still learning to appreciate through analysis of inherited wisdom traditions whose Antarctic origins had been encoded in survival stories transmitted across 25,000 years of cultural memory.
Hydrophone arrays detected impossible echoes. Dr. Robert Anderson had deployed underwater acoustic equipment beneath Antarctic ice for 8 years, understanding sound wave propagation through liquid environments, reflection patterns from solid boundaries, acoustic analysis revealing shape and depth of submerged spaces through mathematical interpretation of travel time and frequency characteristics. Sonar returns from Lake Vostok violated basic underwater acoustics. Echoes suggested hollow spaces where geological surveys indicated solid rock. Geometric acoustics implying artificial chambers rather than natural cavern systems buried beneath 2 miles of ice in East Antarctica. Anderson monitored hydrophone sensitivity through headphones, translating underwater sound waves into audible frequencies. Mechanical clicks of sonar arrays. Hollow resonance traveling through water that hadn't contacted sunlight for millions of years. Beneath familiar sounds, structured echoes suggesting architectural spaces designed to manipulate acoustic properties with intentional precision. Research submarine Aurora maintained position above coordinates marking acoustic anomaly epicenter. Through thick hull, Anderson felt ice weight pressing from above, frozen ceiling isolating this underwater world from surface contact across geological ages. Yet sonar indicated artificial structures on lake floor, geometric arrangements creating acoustic environments unlike any natural formation. Depth readings confirmed previous surveys. Lake Vostok extended 250 meters surface to floor, maintaining liquid temperature despite external conditions, freezing exposed water within minutes. Geothermal heating had preserved underground ocean for millions of years, creating isolated ecosystem evolving independently from surface life. Acoustic mapping revealed architectural features requiring acoustic understanding, structural engineering, construction techniques adapted to subaquatic environments. These weren't random formations creating interesting echoes, but designed spaces manipulating sound propagation for undetermined purposes that training couldn't dismiss despite being unable to explain. Robotic imaging systems began systematic lake floor photography. Underwater cameras revealed sediment layers accumulated undisturbed for millennia, preserving whatever lay beneath with archaeological precision. Embedded in sediment layers were geometric shapes casting shadows, suggesting artificial rather than natural origin. Perfect preservation conditions. No oxygen for oxidation, no bacterial activity for organic decomposition, no geological stress for structural damage. Whatever was constructed on lake floor remained exactly as built, maintained in pristine condition by environmental factors functioning as preservation superior to museum storage facilities. Lake floor construction required technology contemporary engineering struggled to achieve. Underwater building techniques functioning in permanent darkness, waterproof materials maintaining structural integrity across geological timescales, foundation systems supporting massive weights on sediment surfaces without sinking or shifting.
Sonar data revealed systematic urban planning adapted to underwater environments rather than random construction. Structures appeared connected by corridors, following optimal paths for underwater transportation. Central complexes surrounded by smaller buildings, potentially representing specialized facilities or residential areas. Entire arrangement demonstrated engineering forethought, anticipating specific challenges of subaquatic architecture. Acoustic properties convinced Anderson that builders understood sound propagation with mathematical precision. Certain chambers created acoustic amplification, enhancing communication across large distances. Other spaces showed acoustic dampening, preventing sound transmission to surrounding areas. Complex appeared designed to manage underwater sound environments according to principles modern acoustic engineering recognized as sophisticated applied physics. Applied physics required theoretical understanding, developing through centuries of scientific observation and mathematical analysis. Ancient builders had achieved acoustic engineering sophistication without instruments measuring sound wave propagation, solving problems modern underwater construction found challenging, using techniques leaving no archaeological evidence. Timing correlation was most troubling aspect. Estimated age of sediment layers covering structures corresponded exactly to final Antarctic warming period end, when climate data suggested the continent was transitioning from partial habitability to permanent ice age conditions. Underwater city construction during the final warm periods before ice sheet formation isolated Lake Vostok from surface contact, demonstrated understanding that Antarctic climate was changing. Surface habitation would become impossible. Preservation of architectural achievements required adaptation to underwater environments surviving coming glaciation. Planned survival not just of populations, but of knowledge, creating underwater archives maintaining structural integrity through environmental catastrophes, destroying surface civilizations. Lake floor construction represented systematic preparation for civilizational continuity through climate change, otherwise causing complete cultural collapse.
Acoustic analysis revealed additional details, deepening mystery beyond technological questions. Certain chambers showed acoustic properties inducing specific psychological states through sound wave manipulation, resonance frequencies affecting human brain activity, harmonic relationships creating meditative experiences through physical manipulation of auditory environments. Applied consciousness research, sound environment use for altering human awareness according to principles modern neuroscience was beginning to understand, implemented in underwater architecture built tens of thousands of years before formal psychology existed as study field. Anderson found himself considering acoustic evidence of minds solving problems modern civilization continued learning to address, using techniques providing no explanation for knowledge acquisition or transmission methods. Underwater structures represented evidence not just of ancient engineering, but ancient wisdom. Knowledge systems understanding environment and consciousness relationships with precision, enabling architectural space creation, designed to preserve psychological and spiritual continuity through environmental catastrophes, otherwise destroying both culture and memory.
Stellar positions revealed impossible knowledge. Dr. Angela Morrison tracked celestial objects with computer-controlled precision at Royal Greenwich Observatory, analyzing astronomical data connecting ancient architecture to cosmic cycles most civilizations never recognized existed. Earth's rotational axis wobbled like spinning top, causing apparent stellar position shifts across millennia. Complete precessional cycle required 25,920 years, so subtle that detection demanded centuries of systematic observation and mathematical analysis sophisticated enough to recognize patterns unfolding across timespans exceeding individual lifespans. Megalithic monuments worldwide showed astronomical alignments accounting for precessional movement with mathematical precision anticipating stellar positions thousands of years in the future. Someone understood not just contemporary sky appearances, but future configurations after Earth's axis wobble shifted apparent positions across centuries of gradual change. Morrison programmed computer display studying alignment data from Göbekli Tepe, 11,000-year-old stone pillars pointing to stellar configurations invisible from that latitude for another 8,000 years. Builders had oriented monuments to future stellar positions, demonstrating precessional mechanics knowledge requiring understanding of astronomical cycles invisible to the naked eye. Mathematical requirements were staggering. Calculating precession demanded recognizing stellar position changes over time, measuring change rates with extraordinary precision, projecting future configurations across millennia of gradual shift. Modern astronomy achieved such calculations using computer modeling and centuries of systematic observation. Pattern repeated across continents. Stonehenge astronomical alignments accounted for precessional shift across thousands of years. Giza pyramids pointed to stellar positions accurate when built, but requiring precession knowledge to explain apparently arbitrary orientations unless builders understood Earth's rotational wobble effects on apparent stellar motion. Angkor Wat demonstrated identical precessional awareness. Temple orientations tracking stellar configurations across complete 26,000-year cycles. Mayan observatories at Chichen Itza incorporated precessional calculations into calendar systems measuring time according to cosmic cycles requiring hundreds of generations for completion.
Morrison programmed telescope coordinates displaying night sky appearance 26,000 years ago when last precessional cycle completed and stellar positions returned to configurations matching contemporary observations. Computer-generated sky maps revealed constellations in orientations invisible for millennia, but becoming visible as Earth's axis continued wobbling toward another complete cycle. Ancient monuments weren't just aligned to historical stellar positions, but synchronized to precessional clock itself, oriented according to cosmic cycles exceeding documented human civilization existence, yet encoded in architectural alignments suggesting systematic astronomical mechanics knowledge modern science rediscovered recently. Understanding precession required institutional memory, maintaining systematic observation across centuries of cultural change. Mathematical sophistication for calculating change rates measured in degree fractions per year. Theoretical framework conceiving astronomical mechanics operating on timescales exceeding individual human experience.
Megalithic builders possessed all requirements, yet left no archaeological evidence of institutions, instruments, or intellectual traditions necessary to develop such knowledge through independent observation. Astronomical sophistication appeared fully formed in architectural record, as if someone had transmitted complete understanding of cosmic mechanics without revealing acquisition methods. Most sophisticated ancient calendars weren't just accurate for their time periods, but calibrated to astronomical cycles requiring thousands of years for completion after civilizations creating them had vanished from history. Maya long count measured time according to cycles extending 26,000 years, precisely matching precessional periods. Vedic calendar systems incorporated similar precessional awareness, organizing time measurement according to cosmic cycles spanning geological ages. Ancient Egyptian calendars aligned agricultural activities to stellar positions, while accounting for precessional drift affecting seasonal timing across millennia. Each system demonstrated precessional mechanics knowledge combined with mathematical capability for projecting astronomical positions across time spans exceeding documented civilization lifespans. Building timekeeping systems for futures they wouldn't witness, encoding astronomical knowledge in calendar calculations remaining accurate long after creating cultures were forgotten. Institutional memory required for extended astronomical observation challenged assumptions about ancient social organization. Maintaining precessional calculations demanded continuous observation across hundreds of generations. Someone had to monitor identical stars night after night, year after year, century after century, carefully noting changes so gradual they were imperceptible to individual observers. But where were institutions supporting such extended programs? Megalithic builders left no evidence of astronomical schools, observatories, or professional astronomer classes. They had somehow achieved systematic cosmic mechanics knowledge without creating obvious institutional infrastructure such knowledge required. Morrison considered knowledge transmission across catastrophic discontinuities. Perhaps astronomical understanding embedded in megalithic architecture wasn't developed through gradual institutional observation, but inherited from sources that had already solved precessional calculation problems. Ancient calendar systems weren't innovative achievements, but preservation projects designed to maintain astronomical knowledge across periods when institutions originally developing such knowledge had been destroyed or abandoned. Precision was too consistent across isolated cultures, mathematical sophistication too advanced for independent development, temporal coordination too systematic for coincidental convergence.
Someone had taught multiple ancient civilizations to read cosmic time according to cycles individual cultures couldn't have discovered through independent observation programs. Observatory darkness surrounded instruments tracking stellar motion with computer-assisted precision as Morrison confronted evidence that ancient minds had achieved astronomical understanding modern science was learning to appreciate using knowledge apparently transmitted rather than developed, preserved rather than discovered. The source of astronomical instruction might have existed in the only place on Earth where perfect preservation could maintain evidence of scientific achievements across 26,000-year precessional cycles themselves. Cosmic calendars carved worldwide weren't just measuring time, but counting toward moments when Earth's rotational wobble would return night sky to configurations matching ancient observations, revealing stellar positions aligning perfectly with monuments built by minds understanding cosmic mechanics we were still trying to remember.
Neural recognition patterns violated learning theory. Dr. Thomas Mitchell had documented cognitive responses for 7 years at Cambridge University, examining brain activity revealing disturbing relationships between human memory and ancient symbols through imaging technology that detected unconscious recognition preceding conscious awareness. Test subjects shown geometric patterns derived from megalithic architecture displayed memory center activation before visual processing areas completed pattern analysis. Neural activity in recognition systems triggered prior to conscious identification, as if human consciousness already knew architectural forms without learning them through cultural transmission or educational experience. Phenomenon occurred across demographic categories with mechanical consistency. Age, education, cultural background, geographical origin made no difference to neural response patterns. Tibetan monks, Australian Aboriginals, Scandinavian engineers, Amazonian shamans showed identical brain activity when exposed to symbols from ancient sites they had never visited and whose existence they had never been taught. Mitchell calibrated brain imaging equipment studying comparative neurological data from subjects shown control images versus megalithic symbol patterns. Control images produced normal visual processing responses. Neural activity beginning in visual cortex, moving through pattern recognition areas, concluding in consciousness centers where subjects could verbally describe observations. Megalithic patterns triggered different sequences entirely. Memory centers activated first, searching for information they expected to find. Visual processing showed confusion signals, neural conflict between what subjects observed and what unconscious memory systems insisted they should recognize. Consciousness centers remained quiet, as if recognition occurred below verbal awareness thresholds. Phenomenon was strongest with patterns from oldest archaeological sites. Göbekli Tepe symbols produced dramatic neural responses. Sumerian cuneiform triggered moderate recognition signals. Egyptian hieroglyphics created mild memory center activation. Human consciousness carried inherited familiarity with symbolic systems, decreasing in intensity as historical time increased distance from prehistoric origins. Walking to imaging laboratory where magnetic resonance equipment mapped real-time brain activity during pattern recognition experiments, Mitchell had discovered this pattern accidentally while studying visual memory formation in archaeological contexts. Research was supposed to examine how modern humans processed ancient art, whether cultural training affected aesthetic appreciation, how historical education influenced symbolic content interpretation. Instead, he had found evidence that human brains contained inherited recognition patterns for symbols never encountered through conscious learning. Neural responses suggesting genetic memory,
evolutionary programming, psychological inheritance connecting contemporary minds to knowledge systems predating documented human culture. Genetic analysis supported troubling conclusions. DNA extracted from ancient burial sites showed genetic markers correlating with neural response patterns documented in living populations. Individuals whose ancestry traced to regions with megalithic construction showed stronger recognition signals when exposed to architectural symbols from those areas. Correlations extended beyond geographical ancestry to temporal relationships challenging genetic inheritance assumptions. Test subjects showed neural recognition for symbols from archaeological sites predating their ancestral populations by thousands of years. Genetic memory preserving information across time spans exceeding biological inheritance mechanisms.
Psychological implications were staggering. If human consciousness carried inherited familiarity with ancient symbolic systems, learning wasn't individual acquisition of new information, but collective recovery of knowledge encoded in neural patterns through processes modern psychology couldn't explain, but could document through brain imaging. Neural recognition wasn't just pattern identification, but activation of areas associated with emotional memory, personal significance, spiritual experience. Ancient symbols carried psychological meaning transcending cultural boundaries, activating universal human responses to patterns important enough to preserve across genetic inheritance systems. Comparative symbol analysis examined relationships between megalithic architectural patterns and symbolic systems appearing spontaneously in isolated human populations. Correlations were mathematically significant. Geometric forms from ancient construction also manifested in art, religious symbolism, visionary experiences across cultures lacking documented contact with megalithic sites. Universality suggested certain patterns triggered innate responses operating independently of cultural learning, but innate responses required evolutionary programming developing over hundreds of thousands of years. Geometric patterns from megalithic architecture had become embedded in human consciousness as inherited recognition systems. Neural evidence pointed toward troubling possibilities. If human brains carried genetic memory of ancient symbolic systems, those systems had been important enough to influence human evolution itself, shape neural development, become hardwired into consciousness through genetic inheritance, preserving recognition patterns across time spans exceeding cultural transmission. Genetic inheritance operated through natural selection favoring survival-relevant information. Symbolic recognition patterns would become genetically encoded only if they provided survival advantages significant enough to influence reproductive success across thousands of generations. Ancient symbols weren't decorative art, but functional technology. Geometric forms designed to trigger specific neural responses, accessing inherited knowledge systems embedded in human consciousness through genetic programming, preserving essential information across catastrophic discontinuities in cultural transmission. Original symbol systems might have been developed in the only place on Earth where perfect preservation could maintain evidence until technology became sophisticated enough to detect neural inheritance they had encoded in human consciousness itself. Mitchell studied brain imaging displays showing activation patterns that connected contemporary minds to wisdom traditions whose Antarctic origins had been preserved not in stone monuments or written records, but in the neural architecture of human consciousness itself. Waiting for neuroscience sophisticated enough to recognize that memory could be inherited across geological spans of time through genetic mechanisms that encoded survival knowledge in the structure of awareness itself. The most disturbing implication was that human consciousness might represent not individual development, but collective inheritance. neural systems connecting modern minds to teachers whose identity had been forgotten, but whose wisdom remained accessible through pattern recognition capabilities that activated when contemporary humans encountered geometric forms designed thousands of years ago to preserve essential knowledge across catastrophic transitions that would otherwise cause complete cultural amnesia.
Classified documents revealed institutional amnesia. Dr. Victoria Steele had learned during 12 years as defense contractor archaeologist that governmental memory had gaps where inconvenient information vanished into bureaucratic silence. Accessing files that officially didn't exist in secure facilities outside Washington, D.C. Operation High Jump mission reports had been buried in military archives for 78 years. Admiral Richard Byrd's 1947 Antarctic expedition was publicly described as a training exercise for cold weather operations. 13 ships, 23 aircraft, over 4,000 personnel deployed to establish American territorial claims. Official mission duration was 8 months. Public objectives involved mapping, scientific research, logistical preparation for potential future polar operations. But classified after-action reports revealed different narratives entirely. High Jump had terminated abruptly, after 2 months, with Admiral Byrd's expedition evacuating Antarctic waters under circumstances remaining classified under multiple national security restriction levels. Personnel debriefing transcripts contained references that couldn't be discussed, geographical features absent from any maps, encounters with phenomena challenging basic assumptions about Antarctic environmental conditions. Steele accessed classified aerial photography from high jump reconnaissance flights. Images showed geographical anomalies military cartographers had noted but never explained. Thermal signatures indicating heat sources where no geothermal activity was supposed to exist. Ice formations suggesting artificial modification rather than natural accumulation. Structural shadows implying construction projects hidden beneath snow cover. Photographic protocols had been more extensive than any previous Antarctic survey. High jump aircraft conducted systematic mapping across regions civilian expeditions never explored, using military-grade cameras and navigation equipment, documenting geographical features with precision exceeding scientific survey capabilities. Most photographs remained classified, filed in archives requiring security clearances most researchers couldn't obtain. Personnel roster revealed institutional secrecy layers. High Jump hadn't just deployed military personnel for training exercises, but included archaeologists, geologists, cartographers, communication specialists whose background suggested investigating specific targets rather than conducting general exploration. Scientists whose post-expedition careers were abruptly terminated or redirected toward projects bearing no relation to Antarctic experience. Declassified portions of Admiral Byrd's personal mission logs contained references making no sense within official mission parameters. Underground facilities requiring no external power sources. Navigation anomalies suggesting magnetic field disturbances beyond natural geological formation capabilities. Personnel reports of equipment malfunction following patterns indicating systematic interference rather than random technical failure. Expedition termination coincided with radio communications completely redacted from official records. Steele observed censorship marks where classified material had been removed from routine operational reports. Entire pages excised from documents supposedly containing only standard military logistics and weather observations. Classification levels exceeded those used for nuclear weapons research or intelligence operations involving hostile foreign powers. high jump personnel had encountered phenomena challenging operational security, plus fundamental assumptions about Antarctic geography and human history.
Communications intercepts provided fragmentary clues. Radio transmissions from high-jump aircraft referenced structures not matching known geological formations. Navigation reports mentioned landmarks appearing on no existing maps. Personnel communications described visual observations contradicting established understanding of Antarctic environmental conditions. Admiral Byrd's personal communications to Washington Command were transmitted through encrypted military channels, remaining classified until Steele's security review. Available fragments referenced archaeological discoveries, requiring immediate consultation with ancient civilization specialists. Construction techniques exceeding contemporary engineering capabilities. Requests for additional personnel with backgrounds in linguistics, mythology, comparative religion. None appeared in official mission documentation. Civilian specialists were never deployed. Archaeological discoveries were never formally investigated. Expedition termination included personnel debriefings classified at levels preventing subsequent academic research into high-jump findings. Post-expedition personnel tracking revealed systematic career disruption affecting scientists participating in high-jump operations. Research grants mysteriously denied. Academic positions unexpectedly terminated. Publication restrictions preventing Antarctic discovery discussion in forums reaching public attention. Institutional suppression extended beyond individual career interference to systematic academic redirection. Funding priorities shifted away from Antarctic archaeology toward safer research topics. University departments supporting polar research found budgets reduced or eliminated. Professional associations discouraged scholarly interest in topics related to ancient Antarctic civilizations or advanced prehistoric technologies. Suppression operated through gradual bureaucratic pressure, making certain questions professionally dangerous to pursue until curiosity naturally atrophied from lack of institutional oxygen. Knowledge died not from persecution, but from neglect, funding cuts, and career pressures that redirected inquiry away from inconvenient discoveries towards safer forms of investigation. Satellite imaging detected heat where none belonged. Dr. Lisa Park had analyzed thermal infrared data for NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, distinguishing instrumental error from genuine anomalies through years of experience tracking terrestrial heat distribution patterns that revealed subsurface geological activity and atmospheric temperature variations. Landsat thermal mapping of West Antarctica showed temperature patterns violating polar physics principles, suggesting heat sources where none existed and geometric distribution implying artificial rather than natural origins. False color thermal maps puzzling NASA researchers for 18 months revealed heat signatures appearing as regular geometric patterns distributed across extensive ice sheet areas, organized in arrangements resembling urban planning more than geological formation. Each thermal anomaly showed consistent temperature elevation above ambient ice levels, suggesting internal heating systems maintaining stable energy output across seasonal variations. Physics made no sense. Antarctic geothermal heating was limited to specific geological formations where volcanic activity or tectonic fractures allowed heat transfer from Earth's interior to surface layers. Thermal signatures appeared where geological surveys detected no volcanic activity, no tectonic stress, no underground water systems facilitating heat distribution. Satellite data was undeniable.
Temperature readings indicated spaces beneath ice maintaining temperatures 15 to 20 degrees above ambient levels, warm enough to prevent freezing, possibly warm enough to support human habitation in properly insulated environments. Heat distribution was too organized for natural processes, too consistent for geological phenomena, too systematic for accidental occurrence. Park studied thermal signature stability across multiple observation periods. Satellite data covering 14 months of continuous monitoring revealed heat patterns remaining constant despite seasonal temperature variations that should have affected natural geothermal processes. Artificial consistency suggested internal heating systems operating independently of external environmental conditions. Heating systems buried beneath Antarctic ice would need to operate without maintenance, fuel delivery, or technical oversight for indefinite periods. Technology implied by thermal signatures exceeded current capabilities for autonomous energy generation, suggesting engineering solutions modern science hadn't achieved or rediscovered.
Park activated satellite tracking programming coordinates for real-time thermal monitoring of significant anomalies. Live data streams revealed temperature fluctuations following patterns suggesting controlled rather than random heat distribution. Some areas showed cyclical temperature variations, potentially indicating automated heating systems operating according to programmed schedules. Other regions maintained constant temperatures, suggesting continuous operation designed for specific thermal requirements. Underground architecture implied by thermal distribution required engineering capabilities anticipating problems most subterranean construction never addressed successfully. Maintaining structural integrity in environments where temperature cycling caused expansion stress, destroying building materials. Preventing condensation problems that could flood underground spaces. Managing air circulation in sealed environments without surface access for ventilation systems. Modern underground construction struggled with these challenges using computer-controlled environmental systems and advanced materials science. Antarctic underground construction would face additional problems related to extreme cold, ground instability, complete isolation from surface support systems. Yet thermal signatures suggested ancient builders had solved all problems using techniques leaving no surface evidence. Park studied energy calculations required for maintaining observed temperature elevations across detected areas. Heating infrastructure would need energy output equivalent to small power plants operating continuously without interruption. Natural geothermal processes couldn't sustain consistent energy distribution across extensive geographical areas that thermal imaging revealed. Satellite thermal imaging provided most recent evidence that Antarctic facilities remained active. Heat signatures suggested ongoing technological operations in underground locations where human presence was supposed to be impossible. Energy systems had maintained stable operation for 25,000 years without external maintenance or fuel replenishment. Park found herself examining the implications of artificial heating systems operating longer than human civilization was supposed to have existed. Orbiting above, satellites continued monitoring thermal signatures, whispering of engineering capabilities modern technology was learning to achieve, preserved in operational condition by environmental factors isolating them from surface interference for millennia. Thermal signatures represented evidence of ancient wisdom, engineering solutions understanding environment and survival relationships with precision enabling heating system construction designed to preserve human life and knowledge through catastrophic transitions otherwise causing complete civilizational collapse.
those systems might still be running, maintaining habitable temperatures in underground facilities waiting beneath Antarctic ice, like vast libraries designed to preserve human potential through environmental catastrophes we hadn't learned to anticipate. Using preservation technology that anticipated our need to remember capabilities we had inherited rather than invented. The heat wasn't just evidence of ancient technology. It was proof of ancient foresight. Minds that had understood something about the cycles of civilization and catastrophe that enabled them to build preservation systems designed to outlast ice ages, climate transitions, and the forgetting that comes when surface civilizations collapse, but their underground archives continue maintaining optimal conditions for knowledge storage across geological spans of time.
Plato's measurements matched Antarctic geography with mathematical precision. Dr. Dimitri Kostas had studied Timaeus and Critias in original Greek for 28 years, examining descriptions containing geographical specifications that corresponded to no known ancient civilization except one whose existence required rewriting assumptions about human geographical knowledge and technological capability. Numerical specifications weren't vague mythological metaphors, but surveyors' calculations. Atlantis measured 1,200 stadia in length, 800 stadia in width. Central Island was 50 stadia across. Alternating rings of land and water were each 200 stadia wide. These were mathematical measurements rather than symbolic descriptions. Kostas studied comparative analysis of Antarctic geographical features, noting correspondence exceeding coincidental possibility. The Ross Ice Shelf measured approximately 800 by 800 kilometers, matching Plato's specifications when classical stadia were converted to modern measurements. Central plateau regions showed elevations and proportions aligning with Atlantis' mountain-surrounded plain descriptions. Even concentric geographical features matched Antarctic topography hidden beneath ice sheets. Plato had written his account around 360 BCE, nearly 2,000 years before European Antarctic discovery. Athenian philosopher had acquired detailed geographical knowledge of continent that wouldn't appear on maps until the 19th century. Conventional explanation was pure imagination. Plato inventing Atlantis as philosophical allegory using fictional geography to explore political theories about ideal societies and civilizational decline. Yet geographical accuracy suggested complexity beyond invention. Kostas had verified Plato's measurements against satellite mapping data, finding correlations exceeding what random speculation could achieve. Proportions were correct, spatial relationships matched Antarctic geography, environmental descriptions corresponded to climate reconstruction suggestions of ice-free Antarctic appearance. Temporal specifications were equally precise and troubling. Plato claimed Atlantis' destruction 9,000 years before his time, placing catastrophe around 9600 BCE. Climate data indicated Antarctica's final warm period ended around 10,000 BCE, when rapid cooling transformed continent from partially habitable to permanently frozen. Chronological correspondence was accurate within centuries. Ancient Egyptian priest historians like Manetho had maintained chronological records extending thousands of years before earliest Egyptian dynasties, suggesting institutional memory preserving historical information across periods when writing systems supposedly didn't exist. Egyptian sources described interactions with advanced peoples possessing technological capabilities exceeding contemporary achievements.
References to builders constructing monuments using techniques Egyptian engineers couldn't replicate. Descriptions of navigators possessing geographical knowledge covering territories beyond Egyptian exploration. Accounts of teachers providing mathematical and astronomical instruction, enabling Egyptian civilization to achieve capabilities appearing suddenly in archaeological records. Knowledge transfer patterns matched Plato's descriptions about Atlantean survivors escaping catastrophic destruction and establishing new civilizations in different geographical regions. According to Egyptian sources, these teachers provided instruction in metallurgy, architecture, astronomy, social organization before disappearing from historical records, leaving behind achievements and institutional memories of their contributions. Institutional memory required institutions preserving information across millennia of political change, cultural transformation, environmental disruption. Egyptian temple complexes had maintained priestly archives for thousands of years, creating continuous historical preservation connecting classical antiquity to prehistoric origins through careful transmission of documents and oral traditions. Preservation wasn't perfect. Egyptian records contained gaps, inconsistencies, obvious mythological elements, making literal interpretation problematic. But geographical accuracy of Atlantis descriptions suggested some elements preserved actual historical information, transmitted through Egyptian archival systems across thousands of years of cultural change. Civilizational descriptions matched archaeological evidence from sites demonstrating advanced capabilities without obvious developmental phases. Atlantean society was portrayed as sophisticated from earliest periods, possessing metallurgy, navigation, astronomy, engineering, appearing fully formed rather than gradually developed. Technological capabilities exceeded what most ancient civilizations achieved through independent innovation. Most troubling was Plato's description of Atlantean influence on other civilizations. According to dialogue, Atlantis had established colonies across multiple continents, spreading technological knowledge and cultural practices, enabling less advanced societies to achieve capabilities they couldn't have developed independently. Influence patterns matched archaeological evidence of sudden technological advancement in ancient civilizations worldwide. Egyptian pyramid construction, Mesopotamian mathematics, megalithic architecture across Europe and Asia appeared in historical records with sophistication suggesting inheritance rather than innovation. Overlooking the waters that had witnessed civilizational rise and fall across thousands of years, Costas found himself considering allegory as preservation rather than invention. Perhaps Plato's Atlantis wasn't philosophical fiction, but historical encryption, geographical and technological information encoded in narrative form to preserve knowledge of advanced prehistoric civilization whose existence couldn't be discussed directly without challenging institutional assumptions about human origins. Destroyed continent might represent geographical memory transmitted through Egyptian archival systems, preserving information about ice-free Antarctica and advanced civilization inhabiting it before environmental catastrophe buried everything beneath ice sheets, accumulating faster than evacuation could preserve more than fragmentary knowledge of what had been lost. The dialogue wasn't mythology, but memorial, preserving geographical coordinates and technological capabilities of teachers whose Antarctic laboratories had solved problems Mediterranean civilizations were still learning to address. Encoded in philosophical narrative that could survive the institutional forgetting that erased direct references to origins
too ancient and too sophisticated for classical antiquity to acknowledge without undermining their own claims to civilizational precedence.
Mineral formations defied natural crystal physics. Dr. Alex Chen had extracted samples from Antarctic ice containing crystalline structures that challenged everything material science understood about geological formation processes. Working in MIT's Advanced Materials Laboratory, surrounded by instruments analyzing atomic structures with precision revealing individual molecular arrangement. Routine mineralogical analysis of debris from thermal anomaly sites detected by satellite imaging had expected volcanic glass, metamorphic minerals, sedimentary formations typical of Antarctic geological composition. Instead, discoveries uncovered crystalline structures showing artificial synthesis characteristics rather than natural formation patterns. Chen focused electron microscopy studying crystal internal lattice structures, noting organizational patterns suggesting intentional design rather than random geological processes. Molecular arrangement followed geometric principles, maximizing information storage density while maintaining structural stability across temperature variations normally causing crystalline fracturing. Information encoding convinced her these weren't natural formations. Spectroscopic analysis revealed quantum coherence patterns, preserving data at molecular levels using principles quantum computing research was beginning to understand. Crystals functioned as three-dimensional storage matrices, maintaining information integrity across geological timescales without degradation or corruption. Quantum information storage required technology current science was developing through experimental research programs funded by governments and corporations investing billions in quantum computing development. Ancient manufacturers achieved crystalline information encoding using techniques modern material science couldn't replicate without sophisticated laboratory equipment and theoretical quantum mechanics understanding. Storage capacity calculations were staggering. Each crystal sample measured roughly 3 centimeters diameter, yet contained molecular structures theoretically storing information equivalent to modern digital libraries. Encoding density exceeded current technology achievements using conventional data storage systems, suggesting manufacturing techniques understanding information theory and quantum mechanics with precision anticipating technological developments by thousands of years. Chen activated quantum coherence detection equipment, beginning systematic scanning of crystalline samples extracted from different Antarctic sites. Results revealed information encoding varying between samples, but following consistent organizational principles. Some crystals contained data structures resembling astronomical observations. Others showed patterns potentially representing mathematical calculations or engineering specifications. Several displayed molecular arrangements suggesting linguistic or symbolic content. Retrieving encoded information required understanding crystalline storage protocols used by manufacturers of these quantum archives. Chen's preliminary extraction attempts produced fragmentary results, suggesting crystals contained vast amounts of organized information but couldn't be accessed without proper decryption techniques. Manufacturing precision required for quantum information storage indicated technological capabilities exceeding human achievement in material science and information theory. Creating stable quantum coherence in crystalline matrices required controlling molecular processes with accuracy modern laboratory equipment achieved only under ideal conditions using extensive technical support systems.
Antarctic crystals had been manufactured using techniques creating quantum storage stability in natural environmental conditions, preventing quantum coherence formation or persistence.
They represented information storage technology surpassing current capabilities while being robust enough to function reliably in conditions destroying modern quantum computing systems. Crystalline distribution patterns across Antarctic extraction sites showed clusters, suggesting systematic placement rather than random geological distribution. Some areas contained crystals with similar molecular structures, manufactured according to standardized protocols. Other regions showed crystalline variation, potentially indicating specialized storage functions or different information categories. Systematic distribution suggested quantum archive creators understood information organization with sophistication modern library science was learning to implement. Different crystal types for different information categories. Redundant storage systems preserving identical data in multiple locations. Hierarchical organization prioritizing critical information while maintaining comprehensive coverage of specialized knowledge domains. Information storage without retrieval was useless. Crystals required encoding technology plus decoding capabilities, accessing stored information across quantum storage matrices. Chen's analysis suggested crystals had been designed for retrieval using techniques modern quantum computing research was developing through experimental programs, requiring technological infrastructure beyond what ancient civilizations supposedly possessed. Preservation method convinced Chen that crystalline archives represented deliberate knowledge preservation rather than accidental mineral formation. Quantum coherence was inherently fragile, easily disrupted by environmental interference, temperature fluctuations, electromagnetic fields. Maintaining quantum information storage across geological timescales required understanding specific conditions necessary for preserving quantum states without external protection systems. Antarctic crystals had survived 25,000 years of environmental change while maintaining quantum coherence detectable through modern measurement techniques. They had been manufactured with quantum mechanics understanding that anticipated environmental challenges their storage systems would face across millennia of geological and climatic change. Chen contemplated information as inheritance rather than contemporary achievement. Human technological development might represent not independent innovation, but recovery of capabilities preserved through crystalline storage systems designed to maintain knowledge across catastrophic discontinuities in civilizational development. Quantum archives suggested someone had understood human institutional fragility and necessity of creating information preservation systems surviving environmental catastrophes, social collapses, technological disruptions that would destroy conventional libraries and educational institutions. Crystalline archives represented ancient wisdom. Quantum storage systems preserving not just factual information, but understanding about maintaining knowledge across catastrophic transitions, otherwise causing complete civilizational amnesia. Accessing preserved wisdom required not just technological sophistication, but philosophical preparation. Readiness to discover everything we thought we had invented had already been perfected by teachers whose quantum libraries waited beneath Antarctic ice like consciousness seeds, designed to germinate when human minds became sophisticated enough to remember what they had been encoded to preserve. The crystals weren't just storage devices. They were promises, molecular commitments made by minds that understood the cyclical nature of civilizational rise and fall, technological achievement and loss. They had encoded not just data, but hope, preserving human potential in quantum storage that could outlast ice ages and institutional forgetting, waiting for consciousness sophisticated enough to inherit what had been preserved across 25,000 years of patient storage
in the world's most perfect natural archive.
Dawn was breaking simultaneously across 6 continents as data streams converged in real time. Dr. Sarah Mitchell monitored ice core analysis at McMurdo Station, while Dr. Marcus Thompson's radar signatures updated from coordinates 800 kilometers away. In laboratories and observatories worldwide, 14 researchers who had never met were documenting identical, impossible truths from 14 different scientific perspectives. Antarctica had not always been frozen. Evidence was undeniable, synchronized across multiple disciplines with mathematical precision, eliminating coincidence as explanation. Climate data showing ice-free periods, radar mapping revealing buried architecture, satellite imaging detecting artificial heat sources, genetic analysis tracing population dispersals, cultural studies documenting identical flood memories. Each investigation reached identical conclusions through independent methodology. Human civilization was older than history recorded, more sophisticated than archaeology acknowledged. Its origins lay buried beneath ice sheets, preserving evidence too perfectly to deny and too systematically to dismiss as natural formation. The secure communication channel connected international research network that had quietly collaborated for 18 months. Faces appeared on screen one by one, colleagues known only through encrypted data sharing and careful academic correspondence. Thompson from radar sites, Vasquez from Stanford map collection, Crawford from Woods Hole climate analysis, Hassan from pyramid measurements, all looking exhausted, exhilarated, slightly afraid of what their combined evidence revealed. Correlation analysis was complete. Every independently documented anomaly pointed toward identical historical conclusions. Antarctic civilization had existed during ice-free periods ending approximately 25,000 years ago. Technological capabilities demonstrated through preserved evidence exceeded any known ancient civilization achievements. Preservation methods suggested systematic preparation for environmental catastrophe and civilizational continuity through climatic transitions destroying surface-based societies. Liu's genetic data showed population dispersal patterns matching Antarctic glaciation timing. Brennan's flood mythology research revealed cultural memories preserving technical knowledge about survival strategies and rebuilding procedures. Anderson's acoustic mapping detected underground facilities, still operational after millennia of environmental isolation. Morrison's astronomical analysis demonstrated calendar systems encoding cosmic cycles requiring institutional observation across time spans exceeding documented human civilization. Military suppression Steele had documented explained why evidence hadn't reached public awareness despite decades of accumulating data. Operation High Jump and subsequent classified expeditions had encountered identical anomalies civilian researchers were documenting through independent investigation. Institutional interests determined such discoveries posed threats to established historical narratives that academic and government organizations had committed to maintaining. Park's satellite thermal imaging provided recent evidence that Antarctic facilities remained active. Heat signatures suggested ongoing technological operations in underground locations where human presence was impossible. Energy systems maintained stable operation for 25,000 years without external maintenance or fuel replenishment. Crystalline archives Chen had analyzed represented ultimate evidence of systematic knowledge preservation. Quantum information storage systems maintaining data integrity across geological timescales while remaining compact enough to hide where accidental discovery was unlikely until technology became sophisticated enough to detect and interpret contents. Kostas's analysis of Platonic sources suggested Antarctic civilization knowledge hadn't been completely lost to historical memory. Egyptian archival systems had preserved geographical and technological information about advanced prehistoric societies, corresponding exactly to modern scientific investigation discoveries through independent analysis of physical evidence. Convergence made conclusions inevitable. 14 scientific disciplines produced evidence pointing toward identical historical reality. Antarctic civilization had existed, achieved remarkable technological and intellectual sophistication, developed preservation systems maintaining evidence across environmental catastrophes, burying homelands beneath ice sheets, while simultaneously dispersing knowledge through cultural transmission networks, influencing every subsequent civilization. Evidence suggested advanced civilizations had faced contemporary challenges before and developed sophisticated solutions for preserving knowledge across catastrophic discontinuities. Underground facilities maintaining habitability through ice age conditions. Crystalline archives storing vast information in quantum storage systems designed to survive geological transitions. Cultural encoding, embedding technical knowledge in mythological narratives, preserving essential information through oral transmission across periods when written records were lost. Most importantly, genetic and neural inheritance systems, preserving advanced knowledge fragments in human consciousness itself, creating recognition patterns and intuitive understanding, connecting contemporary minds to wisdom traditions whose origins extended back to teachers solving problems modern science was learning to address. Satellite data suggested preservation systems were still operational. Thermal signatures indicating artificial heating, maintaining habitable temperatures in underground facilities. Acoustic properties suggesting architectural spaces designed for human occupation. Crystalline storage systems containing information archives waiting for technology sophisticated enough to access quantum libraries. In laboratories worldwide, 14 researchers sat as implications penetrated beyond academic curiosity into existential recognition. They weren't just discovering ancient civilization evidence, but recovering memory of human potential preserved across 25,000 years of institutional forgetting, environmental catastrophe, systematic knowledge suppression.
Preservation hadn't been perfect. Much was lost during transitions, burying Antarctic civilization beneath ice and scattering survivors across continents, where rebuilding from fragmentary knowledge while adapting to environments that couldn't support technological systems their homeland had maintained. But enough survived to suggest what human civilization might achieve if it remembered rather than repeated, recovered rather than invented, learned from ancient wisdom instead of dismissing it as primitive mythology. Outside, sun climbed toward positions ancient astronomers had calculated with precision modern technology barely matched. In underground facilities potentially still operational, heating systems maintained temperatures according to engineering principles current science was struggling to rediscover. Quantum archives preserved information that could transform human understanding of consciousness, technology, relationships between knowledge and survival. Awakening transcended archaeology. Beyond discovering ancient civilization evidence or recovering lost knowledge fragments, it involved recognizing that human potential extended far beyond contemporary achievements, that wisdom traditions preserved across catastrophic transitions contained instructions for capabilities we had forgotten we possessed.
Every archaeological anomaly, unexplained ancient achievement, mysterious appearance of sophisticated knowledge in historical records might represent not external intervention, but internal inheritance, genetic and cultural memory connecting contemporary minds to teachers whose Antarctic libraries had solved problems we were still learning to understand. Perhaps ice was melting not just because of climate change, but because preservation periods were ending, quantum archives were ready for access. Human consciousness had developed sophisticated enough to remember what it had encoded in crystalline storage systems buried beneath Antarctic ice as insurance against forgetting that comes when civilizations fall, but knowledge they preserve continues waiting for minds ready to inherit wisdom. Understanding survival requires remembering rather than discovering what we already knew, but learned to forget. The evidence whispers across every continent, in every laboratory, through every instrument that can detect traces of what lies beneath the ice. We are not the first civilization to achieve technological sophistication. We are not the first to face environmental catastrophe. We are not the first to preserve knowledge for future generations who might need to remember what their predecessors had learned about survival, wisdom, and the eternal human capacity to rebuild from fragments of understanding that connect us to teachers whose Antarctic libraries still wait beneath ice and silence, preserving answers to questions we are just learning to ask. The awakening had begun, not with dramatic revelation, but with quiet recognition that everything we thought we knew about human origins required reconsideration, that the foundations of civilization lay not in river valleys of Mesopotamia, but beneath ice sheets that had preserved evidence of human potential we were only beginning to remember, that the ancient teachers whose wisdom we had dismissed as mythology were still with us, encoded in our genetics, embedded in our consciousness, waiting in quantum storage beneath Antarctic ice for the moment when human civilization became sophisticated enough to inherit what they had preserved across 25,000 years of patience, foresight, and faith in the capacity of consciousness to remember itself across geological spans of forgetting and recovery.